Who fam, here we go. So, I'd certainly love to hear that insight. We all had that passion for the game. That's one of my teammates that I was talking to there. So, again, have that passion for the game. We love it. All sorts of things to talk about. So, if anybody has any questions, please chime in. And we will try to the best of our ability to address those questions from my perspective for sure. So, first thing, one of the things that really stood out to me was when you start looking at everything that happened to MJ leading up to that moment. What was very apparent to me was the support group that he has, and that was, of course, his mother is the backbone of that support group, and she's the real MVP, as KD would say. His mom is the GOAT, and she's the GOAT because she certainly deserves, at the very least, a finder's fee from Nike. That's for sure. She deserves that. And she also deserves, she is the reason why after the unfortunate events that led to Michael losing his father, he was able to refocus and at least for that year, finish it out in 93 and go and get that title. So his mother she is such a big influence in his life. And she is, without question, no, without doubt, she is the foundation. And, that's definitely apropos given the fact that we just had Mother's Day yesterday. So again, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. We love you. We thank you for all that you've contributed to us and continue to contribute to us. So that was very apparent to me. And when you start looking at that in the terms of being in the NBA or what it takes to play at the highest level, oftentimes, again, Hoop fam, you've heard me say this before, when you see a player and they don't make it in the NBA, more times than not, it's not because of the talent. It's because of all the other things, the extenuating circumstances, the ancillary things around them that often cause them not to make it. So when you're trying to do something that 470 people in the world currently do, not only do you have to have innate talent, you have to oftentimes have the cheat code in terms of that innate talent and that athleticism. You also have to have an incredible support system as well that continues to power you even when sometimes you don't believe in yourself or you're starting to falter a little bit. And so that support system that Michael had through his parents actually led to the confidence that he had. Because again, that confidence, oftentimes we see people and we talk about confidence and people say, oh, certain players they're born with that confidence. Well, not necessarily. That confidence can be built through work. It can be built through support. And you actually start believing in yourself even more when you're putting that work in. And because you have that support system that believes in you as well. And also when you need an anchor to help you when you may be starting to falter, that support system functions as that anchor. And obviously his parents were that. And his mother she is the real MVP. And I want to continue to say that. I'll say that until the cows come home. So again, shout out to Dolores. You are awesome. All the mothers out there, you're awesome. And thank you again. So that was one of the things that really sort of resonated with me as we talk about Michael and this confidence that he exuded. And it was the ultimate confidence. And he always talked about that going back to watching his parents and the influence that they had on him. And with that support group, the other thing that you start to see as well is oftentimes there's this misconception a little bit out there, gets overstated how difficult it is to coach NBA players. And the reality is when you are an expert at your craft, if you can call BS on someone, that's exactly what you're going to do. So they require you to know your craft. But at the same time, the best players, the people that are the best in their craft, they also want to be held accountable. Because again, I've said this before, Hoop fam, everyone says that dependability is the best ability, meaning you show up, you don't get injured, etc. But you don't get to dependability without accountability. So you have to allow someone to hold you accountable. You have to allow your teammates to hold you accountable. You have to allow your coaches to hold you accountable. And that accountability actually comes from your support group. If you're getting that from them, then it's easy to be held accountable by your coaches, by your teammates, etc. So it's very important to have accountability first. And that gets to the dependability and everything it takes to be great. So that's something that really resonates with me. And great players want to be coached. They want to be held accountable. No question. No question, Dory. Accountability is everything. So, that was one of the things that really resonated with me. And then also, too, Michael, again, it was very apparent that he was collapsing under this machine, the very machine that he was creating, this very platform that everybody wanted to be a part of, because let's face it, they wanted to ride that money train. He was actually collapsing under that and everything that came with that. And you see it even more so in this episode as well. And it's actually one of the things that he shares with LeBron, in the fact that, and Michael referenced this, where he said, when you're on top, and there aren't a lot of negative things that people can focus on, they will find things to focus on to try and bring you down. And he shares that with LeBron because, again, in this social media era, we see that with LeBron, where players are saying, I referenced this last week, Hoop Fam, where players are saying, well, maybe this is toxic, in a toxic environment to play with LeBron. When you play with LeBron, there's a culture of expectations. And I'm telling you, Hoop Fam, whenever you play with a great player, there's a culture of expectations. There are things you're going to have to live up to and things that you're going to have to do when you play with a great player, because that microscope that you shine on that great player is completely different than the microscope that's on other players. And Michael referenced that. And, when you're playing for legacy, and you look at LeBron and you look at Michael, these are legacy players. And one of the things about LeBron, again, when you start looking at the similarities between Michael and LeBron, is when LeBron went to Miami and he formed the team with Wade and Bosh, as great as Dwayne Wade is, there was only one legacy player on that team. That's LeBron James. So Wade had already won a title in 2006 with the Heat, but had he never won a title, no one would have said that Dwayne Wade's career was a failure. But LeBron, because he was the legacy player, same with Chris Bosh, no one would have said if Chris Bosh never won an NBA title, his career could be perceived as a failure. Well, LeBron was that player on that Miami Heat team. And the same, so he shared that with Jordan, being that legacy player. So the expectations are different when you see that legacy player and the things that they have to accomplish and the things that they have to go through and the things that they have to deal with on their platform. So that was something that they both share, that both, as they were ascending to the top to the apex of their respective powers, there were people that were actually trying to take them down. So whether it was teammates, whether it was external forces, you name it, it was there. And, one of the things I really want to talk about with where you had these external forces, and in LeBron's case, you have we're smack dab in the social media era. And then in Michael Jordan's case, coming at the end of the social media era in his last run in Chicago, one of the things that you start to see is as sports starts to grow and these figures start to become pop culture icons, what actually happens is you started seeing the revenue change in sports as well. And as the athletes were starting to be paid more, they're actually starting to be covered differently by the reporters that actually cover these sports. It used to be a time where the athletes and the reporters were actually friends, and they really were peers, because from a salary perspective, they actually made the same thing. So if you were a professional athlete and you were covered a certain way by your friend will probably mask certain things that you may have done that may not need to be known by the public. Or if there's some things that you did, your friend may exaggerate those a little bit to make them a little more spectacular. Well, when you start looking at Michael in the 90s, as the NBA started to grow in popularity, which meant that the salaries and all of those things started to grow as well, you can see that the reporters are completely different than Michael. And it was very evident at his retirement conference the first time when they were at the practice facility and Michael was speaking. If you look around, every reporter that was there, and let's be honest, Hoop Fam, none of those reporters looked like him, and he certainly didn't hang out with any of those reporters. So the way that he was covered, he was creating this machine, and he was collapsing under this machine as well. So that's very important to note, where when you start looking at players like Babe Ruth, for example, he played in an era where he was actually covered by his friends. So a lot of the things that people can look at and say, this may be unscrupulous, or this may be something that's unsavory. It is covered a completely different way because you're actually being covered by your friend. And when you start looking at LeBron, you start looking at Michael, for the most part, these athletes are not covered by people that they consider friends. So with that being said, it's not a coincidence that at certain times during his career, Michael only talked with Ahmad Rashad. So that was a person that he could control the narrative to a certain extent and really talk and unplug because he was being covered by his friend. So that's something that I really wanted to make mention of, Hoop Fam, and it really stuck out to me as I was watching this and thinking about what Michael was thinking about and how he felt while all of this was going on. And if you look at how he, again, was covered, he was certainly getting tired of being covered in that way, where literally when he's being covered by people who aren't his friends, aren't his peers, they have no problem going into your background and saying things about you. And some of those things may not be true. Case in point, when he was talking about how on the Sports Illustrated article, when Sports Illustrated came down and said that he was actually ruining and disrespecting baseball. This is someone who they didn't even talk to him. They came down, shot the cover. He didn't know. And he referenced that and said exactly what we're alluding to right now, Hoop Fam, that, hey, if you talk to me and you write whatever article it is that you're writing, then that's great. But he's saying you didn't even talk to me. You just shot this picture, wrote this article, and put this up on as a cover of Sports Illustrated. And it was very embarrassing. And I think Michael felt a certain way about that because, again, it's not about it being a meritocracy. I'm the best in the world in my craft, and you guys are covering and finding negative things to say about me. So I certainly think for a guy that we can call the petty guy, and we saw that throughout this episode, I think that really resonated with him and fueled him when he came back because, again, he had that external resource that he was looking for to prove everybody wrong. And, one of the other things, too, Hoop Fam, I want to talk about with him trying to prove everybody wrong. And yeah, that's right. The media started to turn him off. And that's exactly right. When they started coming with the gambling stories and covering him in a that's exactly right. They ran with that narrative. No question about that. So when they did that, again, that's alluding to the fact that you have people that are covering you that aren't your friends and that aren't your peers. And they look at you and you are this figure that they have nothing in common with. And quite frankly, they're not trying to have anything in common with you. They're just trying to be part of this cash machine that you generated. And that's, to be honest, the way that I view it, the way that I see it from a scouting perspective, a branding perspective, you name it. That's how I see it. So when you look at that cover again, and that time he spent when he was in Birmingham playing for the Barons, I'm glad they went into his work ethic and talked about just the things, and I can say this as a baseball guy, Hoop Fam, that what they were saying about the a level of minor league baseball was absolutely correct. That is the level where the best prospects, the most valued prospects that an organization has, they play in that double A level, because that's the sort of sink or swim level. That's the level where you're separating the great prospects that you're planning your team around versus the ones that may flame out eventually. So he actually jumped into the deep end. And one of the other things as well that I'd like to mention too is when Jerry Reinsdorf referenced that he was paying Michael his salary because he was underpaid. And we've talked about this before, his basketball salary. And we've talked about this before, Hoop Fam. The fact that Michael Jordan had that 8-year, $25 million deal, and that same presence that was leveraged to Buffalo Nike into giving Michael Jordan a previously a deal that was previously unseen before, that same leverage was not it was not exercised when negotiating Michael's second deal with the Bulls, and he got locked in to a long-term deal that quickly became obsolete as the revenue and the popularity of the league continued to grow, which ultimately caused Scottie Pippen to sign that long-term deal. So Hoop Fam, again, one of the things I like to say a lot is when you are the best player, you have a responsibility to all of the other players on your team in the league as well to take the maximum amount of money that's being offered, because when you take less, what actually ends up happening is the ripple effect, and you cause everybody else to take less as well. So for Jerry to acknowledge that, I thought was telling a little bit, but honestly, for everything Michael Jordan had done, he practically built the United Center, and all the things that, and one of the reporters talked about it, or writers talked about the valuations of NBA teams as well actually went up because this guy was in the league, and they actually went down because this guy was not in the league. So with that being said, when you look at his value and what he means to the business of sports, you can make a case that Michael Jordan may be the most underpaid athlete in the history of the world, if that can be said. So he was realizing the business aspect of it as well. And even with that, I can tell you this, Hoop Fam, even with him paying Michael Jordan's salary, also another thing to mention as well was when the organization, and Jerry Reinsdorf said this, they were selling out. These are AA baseball games. And I can tell you again, from working for the Boston Red Sox, AA baseball games typically don't sell out, whether you're on the road or you're at home. And the fact that they were making revenue off of AA baseball games, again, speaks to the impact and the reach of the brand of Michael Jordan. And it was good that Jerry Reinsdorf referenced that so many people made money off of him, which is absolutely true, which is the other reason why we say that mom is the MVP, because she certainly deserves a lot of this money as well. So they were exactly selling out minor league baseball games because 45 was there. And there were jerseys. There were Birmingham Barons jerseys being sold. I wanted one. Hoop Fam, I didn't get one. There were the Jordan cleats that were available. I didn't get those. And people wanted those as well. So the reach of this man, even when he was playing baseball, and the fact that Jerry Reinsdorf was still profiting off of his presence because he owns the Chicago White Sox. So Jerry was still making that profit even though Michael was not playing basketball, and they were still selling out games. And you saw this reach, even I can tell you, Hoop Fam, from my years in Chicago. We first moved there in 2010, and they were still selling out games because, yes, they got Derrick Rose, but before Derrick Rose, they were still selling out games because they were riding the legacy of the 6 championships in the 90s and the legacy that Michael Jordan played such a major part in creating. So that's very important to really make sure that we make mention of, Hoop Fam, as well. So now going into some of the documentary when he actually was playing, let's take that 93 series before he retired the first time. It was interesting because they played the Nets in the first round. And when they played the Nets. No, let's go back when they played the Nets. This is in '98, before he left the last time. So they're playing the Nets in the first round. And it's very interesting to me because there are some parallels here that I would like to talk about, Hoop Fam, with you all. So when they were playing the Nets get in the playoffs. That team has Keith Van Horn, Jason Williams, rebounder Jason Williams, not Jay Williams. So Jason Williams, Keith Van Horn, Kerry Kittles, etc. Chris Gatling, who was really underrated, really good. So those teams had those players, and they're playing the Bulls in the first round of the playoffs. And the reason, and John Calipari is the coach, and the reason why I wanted to mention that team and why that stuck out to me was because John Calipari in 1996 actually told the Nets to draft one Kobe Bryant. And Kobe, again, when we're talking about the branding here, threatened, because it's all about options, Hoop Fam. He had the grades. So he qualified to go to Duke, did the SAT, did all of that. He had the grades to go to Duke. So it actually created leverage for him. And that's very important to mention, since he created that leverage. No question, Chris Gatling was the man. So since he created that leverage, he could actually force NBA teams, because the rule at the time was high school players are eligible for the draft. But even though they're eligible for the draft, if a team drafted that player and that player decided to go to college, then the player would hold the rights. The team would hold the rights to that player that they drafted until that player's graduating class graduated. But what that player could do is, say in the case of Kobe Bryant, if he wanted to, if a team that he didn't want to draft him drafted him, he could say, okay, I'm going to college, and I'm going to go to college and try and graduate and be here 3 or 4 years until you give up my rights, so I can either go back into the draft or go to the team that I want to be a part of. So Kobe and his representation wanted to force Kobe to Los Angeles, because rightfully so, that was the stage that they needed from a branding perspective to catapult Kobe to being this figure that he ultimately is now. And so they told everybody, we want to go to the Lakers. And if you draft us, we're going to go to college. And Kobe ultimately came out later and said there was no way he was going to college. But we have to think about that in terms of 1996. So I'm referencing that because that team would have been completely different if Kobe Bryant is on that team in 1998. Remember, 1998 was Kobe Bryant's first All-Star appearance. So certainly not saying that the Bulls wouldn't have beaten the Nets if they met in the first round of the playoffs. But remember, again, you have an all-time great transcendent player just starting his ascension, and he would have been on that team in 1998. So that's very important to mention, Hoop Fam. And also wanted to talk about Kobe as well, because when you start looking at Michael and you start looking at these similarities in making players better, and Michael talked about that a lot, so much so that he got emotional about it at one point. And I can tell you, Hoop Fam, as a player, and certainly not comparing myself to Michael Jordan, but as a player, I know the sacrifice, I know what it takes to be a great player and the commitment that it takes. So with that being said, it reminded me of one of the things that I like to say when I'm always talking with players. I would say this when I was working with the Suns. I say this when I work with young players as well. You have to pay a price if you want to play this game. And if you want to play this game at a high level. And Michael referenced this. You either pay it when you face the opposition and they beat you because you didn't put in the work. You pay it when the team tells you, okay, you're not good enough, so you get cut. You pay it if there's someone ahead of you in the rotation and you're sitting on the bench because you didn't put in the work, or you can pay it in sweat equity in the gym. You just choose where you pay it. But the price is inevitable. And Michael referenced that when he said there is a price for greatness. And Hoop Fam, that is something to that not only is something that permeates basketball greatness, but that permeates greatness in life. There's a price to be paid. There's a sacrifice to be made. You have to choose where you make that sacrifice. And so that really resonated with me. And the other thing is, when going again about talking about Kobe and Michael, is one of the things when people are detractors of Kobe and Michael, they often say that these two players did not make their teammates better. And I certainly don't want to sound as if I'm standing for Kobe and Michael, even though I love those guys as players, and Hoop Fam, that's no secret. I also want to say that there are different ways to make players better. And again, oftentimes you hear people that haven't stepped in between those lines talking about making players better. So to them, the only players and the only people that make players better are point guards, because you control the ball, you control the tempo, you control who gets the ball. So Magic Johnson was incredible at making players better. There is no doubt about that. That is not debatable. But at the same time, even though he was making players better, he also had the inherent advantage of also playing with Hall of Fame players before, Hall of Fame players with the Lakers, number one. He showed up on a team that already had Kareem. And then the second thing as well with Magic making players better is he had the ball in his hands. So it's easy for point guards to make players better. Well, guess what? Guys at other positions, Hoop Fam, make guys better as well also. And they do it in different ways. You don't always have to be a facilitator and a person that has the ball in your hands to always make guys better. And so Michael and Kobe did that through their work ethic. It was a foundational principle when you watch those players work. And the communication is, if that guy is doing that and he is at this level, I certainly need to follow suit and be doing the same thing. So with that being said, that's something that really sort of resonates with me and really makes me think about Michael and Kobe, because they both made guys better in that regard, where they used their will, they used their work ethic, and they were also verbal, but it seemed as if they were attacking players. And I've said this before, Hoop Fam, and I'm glad Steve Kerr actually said this, but Steve Kerr referenced all the things that we're talking about, Hoop Fam, earlier as to why Derek Fisher is Kobe Bryant's favorite teammate, because those guys don't allow Michael and Kobe, respectively, to buffalo them into not being basketball players. You will not punk them into not being players, because ultimately they need you. So with that being said, those guys were able to motivate their teammates through those actions. And no question about that. Michael always said that, hey, if I'm going to ask you to do something, I certainly can do that as well. And BJ Armstrong actually said this, and BJ's one of my friends. And he said this, and this goes back to one of the Isaiah ideas that I said when I talked about Hoop Fam a couple of weeks ago, the similarities between Isaiah and Michael instead of the differences. And when you are Isaiah Thomas, when you are Michael Jordan, and you are doing the things that you're doing, and you're doing those constantly, it is hard to be seen as a nice guy. It is hard because what's being asked of you, the responsibility that you bear, is completely different than everybody else. The competitive nature that it takes to do the things that you do is different than everybody else. So again, talking about branding, Isaiah was like this. I'll tell you another one. Hoop Fam, Magic Johnson. Again, the great Magic Johnson had this incredible smile. But you ask the players that were on that team, he held those guys accountable, because he knew, if you can stand up to me and withstand the barrage of Magic Johnson, then we can go win a championship. And so Magic was also playing his role in helping players be able to be the best versions of themselves in that regard as well. So Hoop Fam, again, Kobe Bryant also talked about this with Dwight Howard the first time they were together in LA. And now Dwight Howard this year has openly said that I probably was not right in terms of how I approached the game my first time around with the Lakers, because Michael referenced that. When you're trying to win championships, man, it's not all fun and games. We're not coming in here joking around and laughing. We're coming in here to get some work done. So Kobe was setting that same tone and leading his team the same way. There's famous footage, Hoop Fam, of Kobe sitting out of practice later in his career as he was dealing with some injuries. He's sitting out of practice, and the team had lost a really bad loss maybe the night before. And Kobe comes down and he's like, "You guys are soft. I can't believe you're letting this happen." And he practices, and it's the best practice of the year. The next day, they're going to play the Spurs, and the Spurs were the Spurs, still this great dominant team that they were. And the Lakers destroyed them because of the presence of Kobe Bryant and him lifting others to greatness and being the best versions of themselves. So again, Hoop Fam, the point is, you don't always have, this is a point guard saying this, you don't always have to be a facilitator. You don't always have to be the one that is controlling the tempo, having the ball in your hands all the time to make your teammates better. So I wanted to say something about that. Also, Hoop Fam, I certainly want to talk about Scottie Pippen. And when we're looking at Michael's influence on Scottie, and once Scottie left and you start looking at what happened in the playoffs that year when they played the Knicks, etc. So Scottie is now emerging from the shadow. And, and it's funny, people were saying that, yeah, and it's so true, where Scottie is leading the team and he's not a scorer, he's a facilitator, certainly how he sees the game. But that year, I think he was at almost 23 points a game. So I would hate to see him if he were actually a scorer, but Scottie was so talented, he could do everything on the floor. And the team talked about that breath of fresh air that they needed and how things were when Scottie was the facilitator. And they talked about how they shared the ball, the success, all of these things early on. And then as you get into the deeper, you start swimming into deep waters and you realize you need that shark. And that's where the team started to understand really the influence of Michael. So I think just as much as it was important for Michael to get a break, it was also important and to understand how much he loved the game through that break. It was also important for Scottie Pippen and other players to understand the burden that Michael was carrying. And so when he came back, I think they understood him better. And that led to a higher level of connectivity between Michael and his teammates as well. So I think that's something to reference. But back to Pippen and the shot in particular, when he took that, when he wanted to take that game-winning shot on that biggest stage, partly because, let's break that down a little bit, Hoop Fam, he was now on the biggest stage without Michael, so he was very eager to show who he was as a player, because you can say to a certain extent that and Olajuwon won the MVP that year. You can't argue with that. He won the title. But you can say with Scottie leading his team in scoring, rebounding, assists, steals, minutes played, similar to the Kevin Garnett type of impact on the game, Scottie Pippen was in the running and could have been considered the MVP that season as well. So he wanted to, with the stakes being the highest, being on the highest level, with everybody watching, he wanted to show that I can deliver here. So that's Michael casting the shadow even when he's gone. And the other thing about that, it's interesting. I don't know if he would have, that particular shot, it'd be interesting to see if he would have hit that shot. I think Scottie would have probably looked a different way to get that shot off than the way Kukoc did, where he just caught and shot it. Maybe Scottie would have done something a little bit different because he could cover so much ground. Maybe it would have been one or two dribbles or something of that nature. But Scottie certainly wanted that. Even though they were sharing the ball, He wanted that because he's now a signature athlete for Nike, has his own shoe. He wanted that state. He wanted the microphone that day on the stage and be the lead singer. So that's one thing. The other thing is, yeah, I can't believe he quit either. And I don't think he could believe it. But the other thing about that is when you look at how he reacted afterwards when Scottie said, if I had to do all over again, I probably would have done the same thing. What that speaks to is the acrimony between the organization and Scottie Pippen. That's what it speaks to. And again, Hoop Fam, we're going back here. Part of the reason why Scottie was underpaid was because Michael was underpaid. And the organization could not pay Michael. They couldn't pay Scottie more than they were paying Michael. So Scottie signed a long-term deal and took that gamble also because he was concerned about injuries and taking care of people, and took a long-term deal. And if this sounds familiar, Hoop Fam, let's bring it forward a little bit. When you start looking at the Chris Bosh, LeBron, Dwayne Wade teams in Miami, Chris Bosh was actually supposed to be Carmelo Anthony. But Carmelo Anthony, not wanting to gamble and take a short-term deal, actually took a long-term deal, locked himself in with Denver, and ultimately ended up forcing his way to New York anyway. But the thought process was he was supposed to take a short-term deal so they could all go to Miami and win titles. And certainly Carmelo's legacy would be different. As great as a player as Carmelo is, and he's an unbelievable player, his legacy would have been different had he played on those teams and won titles for sure. But going back to Scottie and the shot and that organizational sort of rift between Scottie and the Bulls, Tony Kukoc, here we are. I think Scottie was fine. With Tony Kukoc taking those shots in the regular season because Kukoc referenced, I made some of those down the stretch during the regular season. But here's the point where we're playing to get to the Eastern Conference Finals, hopefully. And Kukoc is the one that Phil was actually, and if you know Phil, one of the things about him is he would do this in the regular season with Michael Jordan. When the Bulls were down in regular season games, there are clips of him saying it's too early for Michael to come and save us. So there are times where Michael Jordan would be sitting on the bench and Phil wouldn't call a timeout and he's going with the reserves because even if they lose this game, the reserves have to get reps because the thought process is when we're playing for titles, we're going to need them to contribute. So we want to get them some reps in early. Whether we win or lose, we certainly want to get them some reps. So with that being said, Phil was giving Tony reps and Tony was getting those reps. And then eventually those reps led to that playoff greatness. The same with when the Bulls won the title in 1992, when Jordan was still on the team, when they beat the Blazers in that game 6, when they beat the Blazers, they were actually down double digits during that game with Michael on the bench, and they started to come back. And then when Michael came in, the rest is history. That's all she wrote. They win the title. So Phil was very big on having other people contribute, other people make shots, other people be part of the success as well. So Tony was doing this throughout the season. Now we're on the biggest stage and the Bulls are trying to get to the advance to the Eastern Conference Finals. Brian, what's going on, brother? Trying to get to the Eastern Conference Finals. And Scottie is trying to emerge as this guy that after having this MVP caliber season, I can do this. So during the regular season, he's fine with Kukoc taking those game winners. But when the money was on the line, Scottie wanted to take that shot. He wanted to assert his dominance. He wanted to show the world who he was as a player. So the shadow of MJ was still over this team, even though they were successful and MJ wasn't on this team. And now to Scottie Pippen, this shot was bigger than Tony Kukoc taking this shot. What this represented to Scottie Pippen was, you, Phil, are letting the Jerrys take this shot. That's what it represented to Scottie Pippen. It wasn't about Tony Kukoc. It was about Jerry Reinsdorf and Jerry Krause disrespecting Scottie Pippen. That's what this was about. Those were all the things that he was carrying into that particular play. So that was a way for him to exercise his demons. That was a way for him to assert his dominance. And he felt like he was robbed of that opportunity to assert his dominance and, quite honestly, stick it to the organization. And it all stemmed from the disrespect, from the long-term contract, and the stance that the Bulls would not renegotiate deals. So that's what this comes from. And again, to juxtapose this with the Lakers and how organizations do things, the Lakers with Magic Johnson, there was a point in time when Magic Johnson had a 25-year, $25 million contract. And when that became obsolete, as other players started to become $1 million players, that meant $1 million a year for 25 years from Magic Johnson. When that contract became obsolete, the organization ripped it up, gave Magic a new deal. You could do this under the collective bargaining agreement during those days. The organization, this one being the Lakers, ripped up the contract, renegotiated the deal, and also negotiated a piece of ownership of the franchise, a small piece, but nonetheless, a piece of ownership was negotiated into Magic Johnson's deal. That's what the Lakers did. So, of course, the other players in the league are seeing this, especially a Michael Jordan and a Scottie Pippen, where the Bulls are building the United Center on their accomplishments. The Chicago Bulls are actually carrying, and I referenced this before, Hoop Fam, during that time, during the Bulls' dominance, what was actually going on in Chicago was the teams were the Bears, the Cubs, the White Sox. This is the third biggest media market in the United States, and these teams aren't very good. So the Bulls were carrying the city of Chicago and the third biggest media market in the United States. They were carrying this market. So all of the contributions that Michael and the Bulls were making to the sports landscape, the Bulls, Michael, Scottie, etc., felt like these should be recognized, which is why, again, Hoop Fam, and I've said this before, Michael was hardballing the Bulls when he got a chance. And, there was one point where when he was getting the 1 year, $30 million deals at the end of his career with the Bulls, there was one point in time where he's negotiating with the Bulls upstairs and telling them, this is the number. If you don't reach this number, I have the Knicks downstairs waiting for me. So that was Michael finally exercising his leverage as a player, which he had never done in his career. And he never really enjoyed, again, Hoop Fam, you can make that point that Michael Jordan might be the most underpaid athlete in the history of sports. So again, Scottie, when you look at Scottie and you look at that shot, again, Hoop Fam, not about Tony Kukoc. It wasn't about Tony. And it's ironic that he made it, but it wasn't about Tony. And we talk about Scottie's legacy. And Michael talked about Scottie's legacy taking a ding when he called Phil. If you think Scottie's legacy took a ding then, imagine if Tony Kukoc did not make that shot. If Scottie Pippen would have, quote unquote, quit on the team and Kukoc didn't make that shot. Then what would have been interesting is what would have been Scottie's legacy, and also what would Scottie have felt, and would that been a way that he would have felt like, I am sticking it to the organization because you didn't make that shot. And I told you I should have been the one to take that shot. So that would have been interesting. And then the other thing that's interesting about that series as well, Hoop Fam, before I let it go, is ironic that the Bulls had a shot to win that series when Hubert Davis, there was a phantom foul that was called on Scottie Pippen. when he was defending Hubert Davis as Hubert Davis was shooting a jump shot in the waning seconds of one of those games during that series. And they actually called a foul on Scottie. And most people think it wasn't a foul. But nonetheless, Hubert Davis went to the free throw line, shot the free throws, and won the game for the Knicks, which actually may have cost the Bulls a shot at going to the Eastern Conference Finals without Michael Jordan. So this was very ironic that he sat when the Bulls made a game winner, and then you get to the point where Scottie is contesting a shot and a phantom foul is called. No question, John, no question. So a phantom foul is called, and it comes down to Scottie Pippen again. So very ironic. All of the things that are going on in this series, I'm telling you, Hoop Fam, you could not have scripted this better. This was a soap opera that we were watching on the floor. And so it was awesome to see. It told me a lot as a player that still was a Bulls fan and watched the Bulls, and I'm watching what Scottie is going through. It was very interesting to see that. So one of the things I like to talk about as well is, again, the influence of Michael and what he did in terms of shaping other players. And again, Hoop Fam, when you're talking about influence, you talk about all the things that you do as a player. It's one thing to get to the top of that mountain. It's another thing to stay there when everybody is shooting for you. So think about Michael Jordan. You get the story about LeBradford Smith. And I knew that story when they played the Bulls and at the time they were the Bullets. The Washington Bullets were playing the Chicago Bulls in a home and home. And LeBradford Smith had the game of his life, 37 points. And Michael made something up to get 36 and a half on LeBradford Smith. Again, I knew that story. But one of the ironic things about that story is when LeBradford Smith was playing for the Bullets, he wore number 22. But LeBradford Smith played at Louisville. And when he played at Louisville, he wore number 23. So he's actually influenced by Michael Jordan. And Michael is looking at these players, and he is so competitive that the players that he influenced, I think that gave him an edge when he would see them wearing his shoes, when he would see them copying his game, and he went and played against them. So LeBradford Smith, heavily influenced by Michael Jordan. Same thing when you look at when they played Orlando, when Michael Jordan came back in 95. When he came back in 94, 95, and he came back and he's playing against the Orlando Magic in the playoffs. And Nick Anderson gets the steal when he goes behind Michael and tips the ball. But what he also did too, Hoop Fam, in that play, and I remember this, and I'm being a Michael apologist when I say this. The other thing he did as well during that play is he actually tripped Michael. And he ran into Michael's back foot, and Michael's foot actually hit his own heel and tripped himself to a certain extent as well, which caused him to lose that ball. So again, Hoop Fam, that's me being a basketball nerd and really looking at the play. But one of the things, again, in terms of influence, if you look at that clip, when Nick Anderson did that, he's wearing Air Jordan 10s. So he played at Illinois, and he actually patterned as a Chicago guy growing up during the Michael Jordan era and then playing at Illinois. He was heavily influenced by Michael and said the thing about, with Michael being petty guy, 45 doesn't play like 23. Horace Grant said, why did you do that? Same thing with when you look at B.J. Armstrong in Charlotte going at Michael talking, you just poked the bear. So, yeah, no question. Michael's confidence was low because John, I'm going to say this, and this goes into my last point, Hoop Fam, that I want to get on. So Michael's confidence was low at that point. And you can say low, and that's with quotations. And it was low because of the fact that, bringing it current to now, we have the pandemic, and the players have The season's been suspended. So the players aren't playing. So I've been asked, I was on USA Today and they asked me about what do I think about players that, what do I think about players and coming back? What's the biggest thing that teams should worry about? Well, watching Michael Jordan, when he tried to come back, this was the thing that resonates with today. I said when I was talking with USA Today and other outlets when I was asked about the season coming back is it's not the skills when you start talking about players. And I can say this as a player. It's not the skills. Those things come back quickly. It's the conditioning. That's the thing that's the most important aspect, because once you get the conditioning down, the skills come back. And Michael has referenced exactly what I said when I was talking about the players coming back. The conditioning is the tedious part. The skills, hey, we all love to shoot. We all love to get in the gym and work on our game. We all love to do that. Dennis Dembo, what's up, brother? So, yeah, we all love that. So, but it was actually the conditioning. It was all of those things that you really have to focus on. Those are the things that really sort of catapult your skills to the next level. It's the conditioning. And so that's the thing that I worry about. If you bring that forward and you look at the players coming back off of the with the season being suspended, the conditioning. Will the players be in the conditioning to be able to perform at the levels that we're accustomed to seeing them play at? So and Michael referenced that. I thought that was current for today. So again, that the conditioning is everything. The skills are one thing. They come back. It's like riding a bike. The conditioning is everything else. So it was that was very important for me to see. And yeah, so to your point, John, I remember again being in LA, coming back for the off seasons, and I remember being in LA, and my mom worked at Warner Brothers. So I used to go and pick my mom up at work, and I would go and sit on the lot. And I would see the gym every single day when I was out there picking up my mother. And boy, did I want to go in there and play, right? I wanted, because you knew when Michael was in there because the music would be blasting. So I would go in there. So while they were filming Space Jam and he was preparing his comeback, and as you said, John, those Space Jam workouts were like preseason. They're really like postseason basketball. And I remember literally going and waiting and hearing that music and wanting to bust in that gym and play. So that gym, and when I saw that dome that they built for Michael as he was working out and preparing for the comeback and the get back, when the Petty God was preparing for the get back, I was actually on that lot every day, itching to get in there and play. So it was a very exciting time, and we were all curious to see what Michael was going to do, and we all knew that he was going to come back and do something special. We all knew that. And again, when you start looking at from that branding perspective to really tie this up and talk about some of the similarities between Michael and LeBron, it is a bigger story from a branding perspective, and all of the platforms leveraged this and made money off of it. Hoop fam, it's a bigger story to play at a place, leave, come back and deliver titles. That's bigger than staying in that locale, never leaving, and still winning titles, because the degree of difficulty is different. You have now added some drama. You've added all of those things that make this a soap opera. You've added that into it, and you've brought that mainstream fan into it, and they've leveraged all of that at retail, and they make all of us feel emotional about it. All of us feel emotional about it. And when we feel emotional about it, we go buy product. And they actually leveraged it. So they made very educated decisions. They made very educated decisions and turned it into an emotional situation for the consumer. And they all made money off of it. So it's very interesting. Loved it, Hoop fam. Any questions? Appreciate you, Hoop fam. Definitely appreciate it. Thank you for walking with me. We got more stuff coming. I'm having fun doing this. I hope you guys are having fun as well, listening to some of my views as a player, a scout, working for the brand Nike in basketball, all of those different things. Also working, leading a financial division for a basketball division for a major financial management company. All of those different things that I've been fortunate enough to do. So all those things were great. And yes, Trey, appreciate you chiming in. The cry on the floor will always be legend because you're holding in a lot of emotion. It's a lot of emotion that you're holding in, that he was holding in, a lot of things that he dealt with. There's no question about that. So legendary. I certainly remember it. I remember where I was at when all of these moments took place. And there's no question about that, because to your point, Trey, what that cry meant, what it meant him letting go and allowing himself to be vulnerable, having more perspective after he left. All of those things really sort of resonate with me. Cedric, the question is, I appreciate it. The question is, if Jordan would have left, could they have won 8 in a row? That's a good point. I guess the way that I can answer that is this. If Michael's motivation was still there and still at the level that we were seeing it, I do think they could have won 8 in a row. I do. But I don't know again, sorry, I'm off of, so I'm still here. So again, the other thing was, if they would have won 8 in a row, if the motivation was there, I think they could have won 8 in a row. But the problem was Michael was getting to this point because the motivation wasn't there anymore. And the very machine that he was creating, this platform that he was creating that everybody was making money off of, and Jerry Reinsdorf referenced that, everybody was making money off of this platform that this machine that Michael was creating. Everybody was making money off of that. And since they were making money off of it, he was actually collapsing under the very machine that he was creating. So if the motivation was there, I think they could have won 8 in a row. If it wasn't there, I don't think they could have, because Michael was coming apart at the seams. So again, Hoop Fam, I appreciate you all. I'm looking forward to doing this again. Thank you all. Stay healthy. Stay safe. I appreciate you. Cousin, I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate those comments, brother.